Hey, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to the render tree really quick. And actually, what we're going to focus on is materials. I want to explain to you, as a beginner, what exactly is a material and what's a shader and what in the world is the difference between the two, because you really have to understand the key differences between the two in order to really wrap your mind around what all this stuff is. So let's just jump into it. First thing that we need to do is we need to create some kind of a little sample object to check out and investigate. So let's go up here where it says primitive. Let's go to polygon mesh. Let's create a simple sphere. That'll do. This will create a simple default sphere in our scene and open up a PPG, or that's short for property page over here. And let's go down here to where it says subdivisions, and let's just turn the subdivisions up to the maximum here that the slider goes up to, which is 24 and 24. Let's close that PPG. Now, while hovering your mouse over this camera viewport B up here in the upper right, just hit F12 on the keyboard to maximize that view. Okay, I'm going to go over here to my shading options and switch from wireframe to shaded mode. Okay, so here's our little default sphere. Alright, let me turn off the grid by hitting G on the keyboard. There we go. So now all we see is this sphere. Alright, so you can see by default it's gray. There appears to be some kind of light shining on it. That's a default light. Every time you create a new scene in XSI, it creates a default light for you, or else you wouldn't be able to see anything. Everything would just be black. Okay, so in a default scene in XSI, we have a default material, and this default material is simply a gray material. It's a gray Phong material that's applied to every object by default, which is why we see this sphere appears to be gray and a little bit shiny. Alright, so how do I know that? How would I know the material that this thing has? Well, in order to play around with materials and edit them and change your shader networks around, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, you have to go into what's known as the render tree. Now, what in the world is the render tree? Well, it's a special view that allows you to go ahead and manipulate the shaders and things that are plugged in to objects like this sphere, for example, or if we had a character or a battle tank, or maybe a big old open plain with grass and trees and things, whatever it is. So how do we get this render tree? Well, there's a long way and a short way. We can go up here to view, go down to rendering/texturing, and you'll see this menu item called render tree. And you'll see that there's a number 7 next to it. 7 is the hotkey or the shortcut key for the render tree. So from now on, use 7 on the keyboard to go ahead and open up the render tree. So here's the render tree. And the render tree basically has, by default, these two nodes. Now, nodes will appear here depending on what you have selected in your scene. So if I don't have anything selected in my scene, nothing will appear here. And I can show you then by deselecting over here and hitting the refresh button, which is F6 is the shortcut key for that. And now you see that it says selection list is empty. Well, let's select the sphere and let's hit refresh, which is F6. You can also hit this refresh icon button right here, and that'll refresh that for you. Okay, so we have these two nodes, and these are called nodes. This thing here that I'm grabbing and moving around, and this thing here that I'm grabbing and moving around, these are called nodes in XSI terminology. And these nodes do different things. And depending on how you combine nodes in a render tree, you can achieve different kinds of effects and looks when rendering your scenes out using Mentor-Ray in XSI. Okay, so we can see we have this sort of yellowish orange node, and then we have a green node, and the green one just says Phong, and this orange yellow one just says scene material. That's the name of the material node. So what's a material and what in the world is a shader? And are they the same thing? Are they two words that mean the same thing? Are they synonyms, or do they mean two different things? Well, in XSI, when we're talking about XSI, they actually mean two different things. Okay, so let's start off with material. In this shader tree, there's one material and there's one shader. This object right here is a material node. This object on the left, the green one, is a shader node. Every object has only one material. However, every object can have multiple shaders plugged into each other to create different types of effects. Now, if that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. You'll start to see what that means later on through the course of this tutorial. But for now, just know that this material node is the material node that's going to go ahead and determine, going to take all the connections from a shader node like this Phong node on the left that go plugged into it using these lines here, and they're going to determine how this thing looks. For example, This shader node is plugged into the material node, and right now it's determining the surface, shadow, and photons. What that means is that this material node that's attached to this object here, this sphere, is receiving the way that it looks, its attributes of its materials, of its look, is being brought in from this Phong node over here on the left. So for example, if I double click the Phong node to open up its PPG, I can see that I have different attributes that I can play around with. For example, I could change the diffuse color as well as the ambient. I could change the specular highlights, the color right here, as well as the specular decay. And as I do that, it's going to update. So let's click on color and let's change from a gray to say a blue. Now you notice that it updated in my viewport and it updated down here in this little preview shader ball render inside this node. Okay, so you can see that pretty much works with the simple principle and idea of what you see is what you get. Simply change the color here and it updates. So if you want something to look green, you choose green. If you want something to look red, you choose red. It's pretty simple actually. Let me close that. So basically, the attributes of this Phong are being piped into this material node. So this material node is pretty much being altered by this Phong node over here. So the material node works almost like a container. It works almost like this basket. And what's in the basket is determined by the shaders that are connected to that material node or that basket. So if you throw some apples into the basket, well, the basket's going to have apples on the inside. If you throw some oranges into the basket's going to have oranges on the inside. That's basically the idea and principle behind the way that this material and shader system works. So in XSI, a material is one thing and a shader is another. The material is the main node where the shader is going to plug into to determine what this object in 3D looks like. So if this Phong were telling this material node, hey look, you're going to look like dirt or sand, or you're going to look like, glass, or you're going to look like a rock. Well then, this material node is going to look like a rock, or glass, or sand, or dirt, or a cloud, or whatever it is that you're trying to make it look. So the render tree is where you would come and create these networks of shaders that all plug into each other to create different looks and different types of effects for the objects in your scene. So, what are shaders limited to? You're probably thinking, well, shaders can only go plugged into physical objects like this polygon mesh. Not quite. Shaders can be applied to many different things, not just material nodes like this one. Shaders can be plugged into cameras to create lens shader effects. They can even be plugged into lights, so you can create different types of interesting light effects. And we're going to be looking at some of that stuff during the duration of this tutorial. So don't worry about that now. Right now I just wanted to introduce you really quick to what a material node is and what a shader node is and what the difference between the two is. Just to recap, there's only one material node connected to an object. So this sphere object only has this one scene material node, which we can rename if we wanted to. The shader node, however, there's many types of different shader nodes inside of XSI, and we can use them and mix and match them and combine them in all kinds of different ways and combinations to create different effects. So instead of having this look like a simple green sphere, we can make it look like planet Earth, or a meteorite, or a rock, or a marshmallow, or whatever in the world our imagination can come up with. Okay. Another thing that's pretty important here is knowing how to preview this stuff. In order to be able to see what's going on here with this sphere, we have to render. So to do renders, we can use the render region tool, and the shortcut for that is Q. You can also find it here under the render menu. Hit the regions button, and in the sub menu, select the region tool. You notice your icon changes. So just left click and drag to create this render region square right here, so that you can go ahead and see what the final result of this object is going to look like using Mental Ray. We're going to be using that workflow quite a bit. We're going to be making changes to our render tree down here, our shader networks, and then we're going to be using the render region tool to render this out and see how changes are affecting our final output, our final object. So when we change stuff here, we'll see it render and update quickly over here in the render region tool. Powerful little tool there from Softimage XSI. Okay, so that pretty much covers what a material node is and what a shader node is and what the key differences between the two are. So I'm going to end this video here, and in the next one we're just going to go ahead and continue with the topic of the render tree and shaders inside of Softimage XSI.